I don't know anyone my age, or definitely not younger, that's talking about this, and not on a like publicly accessible platform. And there is such little evidence out there. And even when you get research, it's very clinical. You don't get like a personal take on what it's like. I was just like, I talk about everything else. Like, I would love it if people saw this and were like, oh, I've never even thought of that. Like, let me just look into it.
Very excited to have our next guest here. I found her through Instagram. We have Megan Prescott with us today. We're going to be talking all things egg freezing, but I do want to talk about your career before we jump into egg freezing, because a lot of what we talk about on the podcast and what I want to be celebrating is different career paths, journeys, like really breaking down societal expectations of what we should be doing. You know, it doesn't have to be these corporate 9-to-5s. Everybody is, you know, should have the opportunity to follow things that they're passionate about. So I would love for you to share more about the work you do. And you have a really funny highlight on your Instagram of all the different things that you've done, which I loved. I thought that was awesome. Because when you think about it, I think there's so much value in doing so many different things and just trying. That's been my journey too. Like I was watching yours and it's like, oh my God, thinking about all the different things and jobs and things that I've done too that have led me to where I am. So I'd love for you to share more about yourself, your career, and just sort of your path.
Yeah. So yes, it's been a bit of a wild ride. But I've been acting for nearly 15 years now. And I was on a show called Skins, which was quite big in the UK, at least, back in 2020, I think. 2010. And since then I've continued acting, but acting is a very difficult industry, as are a lot of creative freelance jobs. And I found that I had to do like a bunch of different minimum wage jobs, 0-hour contract jobs, just to be able to like pay my bills, but also have time free in the day to be able to go on auditions and like prep auditions. And you don't get paid to go on auditions. So but you got to keep the day free. So there was lots of different work I tried to do to like pay my bills whilst acting. But I just found more and more that I was like, there are not enough hours in the day to do a minimum wage job. And especially now there's a cost of living crisis. And when COVID hit, it got even worse. And I was just like, there aren't enough hours in the day to make a living wage. If you're getting paid minimum wage, it's just not a living wage. So I was like, right, well, I either have to give up acting and writing, which are like my passions and the only thing I'm good at. Like I'm not built for a academic career. Like I tried desk jobs. My brain is not created for that type of work. I'm autistic and I have ADHD. So it really was built for creative industries. And so I was like, right, I've either got to give up acting and just get like a full-time 9-to-5 job, which I knew would make me miserable, or I have to find a way to make more money in less time. And when I think I was around 24, I decided I'm going to start stripping, because that is really the only way I can carry on acting and writing and make enough money and also still have the days free.
Right. Auditions. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, it was great. I wasn't a very good stripper, but I did make enough to not have to work 6 days a week, 12-hour shifts. So it was still very hard work, but it was the answer that I needed. And then when COVID hit, I was working as a gin distillery tour guide, and we weren't getting furloughed. So I was like, I have like £150 in my account. Like I have to pay my rent. And I had a friend who was stripping, and she was like, Meg, you are leaving money on the table. You need to start an OnlyFans page. Like, you only ever need to do what you're comfortable with, but I guarantee you'll be able to get by if you start an OnlyFans page. And she was right. And it has allowed me to continue doing what I love, which is acting, writing, and directing. And I'm now taking a solo show to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival this year, which I've written and I'm performing in.
Oh, amazing.
It is very loosely based on my experience and the way people treat performers in acting versus how they treat sex workers, which I think is still a type of performance. But because of all the outdated stigmas, we demonize one and not the other.
Yeah, as you're talking, that's exactly what I'm thinking, is just the stigma around those types of jobs and the judgment around those type of jobs.
Yeah.
Just the meaningfulness for you of what it allowed you to do, which was continue to pursue your passions. I bartended forever, and I worked with, and so I understand the need to like keep the days open, because a lot of my great friends that were in bartending were amazing creatives, whether they were actors or, singers. They needed those days open. So that was the night jobs that gave them the opportunity. And I so relate with you about, I think certain people, and myself included, are not built for the 9-to-5 life. I tried it and I would literally cry at my desk. And I think, the permission just to go out and find something different. Not everybody is built the same or meant to do the same thing. And I, through the podcast, are hoping to break down these ideas that it has to look a certain way, that it has to be the job, or it has to be, what we're told to do. And that, I love that you went out on your own and you were following what you were built to do.
Yeah. And I think I do. Well, the only reason I could afford to do egg freezing, which is something I've wanted to do for a while, was because I had enough income from making content on OnlyFans that I could actually do it. And I don't know, it feels like to me, there is some overlap in the way that, I have to pay attention to the fact that sex work is maybe one of the only industries where men are paid more than women almost all of the time. And in sex work, a lot of the time, it gives you the money and the freedom as a woman to have more choices. And I think egg freezing gives you a lot more choices, because you're like, right, let me pause that so I can still do it later, but I've got time. I just don't know. I found like sometimes people's response to women having more freedom and anything that allows that, then they're not a fan, but they don't really know why they're not a fan. And I'm like, seems like you don't like the idea of women having freedom. Maybe that's something you need to work out. I
love that. I love how you're like, comparing those two, or the parallels there. I think there is a lot of discomfort in things that look different than they are traditionally supposed to look. So whether that be like gender roles, or more women in education, or excelling in education, because we are excelling in careers, I think there's a lot of discomfort in things that look different. I think there's a lot of narrow perspective there.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the time I sometimes I understand, because I know that women especially have been conditioned to be like, this is how your life should look. This is normal. And if you like fray from this, then you're abnormal. Right. And I think especially people like maybe my mum's generation, there wasn't really the option to stray from the societal norms. And so they like forced themselves into this like life that maybe they weren't meant for, or they didn't want. And then seeing a whole generation of women who are like, actually, I don't think I want to do that. I get why sometimes they're like, oh, wow, it's all right for some. I can get it. But I'm like, yes, but this is a good step. Like it's good that we're doing more than what we want,
It's a great step. And I think there have been some real trailblazers in that have like frayed from the path, that are showing everyone else that it's okay to do that. Because I do think there's a bravery that comes with it. I love that you're so open about the work that you do, even there is still stigma and judgment on that. And I think we need more women that are owning that and saying that's okay. Like it's okay because it allowed me to follow my dreams, instead of, like you said, getting like stuck in the shoulds and what we should be doing.
Yeah, it's very weird, because it's almost like sometimes people think that it would be more noble or respectable to have a job where you're still on your feet, you're still using your body. But let's say bartending, which I also did for years, and you're exhausted. I don't know how it is in America. I think bartenders are treated better there, but here there's no tips. You're treated like crap, and you're still like treated differently because you're a woman. So I was like, why is it more noble to get paid £10 or less? I was getting than £10 an hour and working 12-hour shifts than working 5 hours and getting paid the same amount. Like,
I so relate to that. I had experience when I was bartending. I have an identical twin sister who was in, and it's interesting because we were very identical, but our paths were very different. Like she had kids young. I just had my, a few years ago. So our paths like very much were different, but she was in corporate finance. I was bartending, and I went to her like, she was leaving that job, and I went to the like going away party thing, and I'm surrounded by like all these finance people. And, the first question everybody asks is, what do you do? Mm-hmm. And so I would say bartending, but I myself also had my own like self-judgment on that, which I look back now and I wish I didn't, because I would answer that question with, I bartend and I'm in school for this, doing that, etc. And I'm like, I hate that I felt that way, but I did, because there's the societal, judgment. And all these finance people were like, oh, that's cool. That must be fun. The judgment like was so obvious. And I'm just thinking to myself, it is a really hard job. You probably couldn't do it. And guess what? I probably make more money than you. And guess what? I could probably get on a plane tomorrow on a Monday morning if I wanted to. Like, I just had that flexibility and that freedom, but the judgment was so there. I remember that like clear as day.
Yeah. Yeah. It happens.
Yeah. Yeah. You did already kind of bring up the egg freezing. That was something that you wanted to do, and doing these jobs allowed you to have the money, because that's one thing we talk about here. It is very, very expensive. I'm curious how you first learned about egg freezing and started to think about that was something you wanted to do.
How did I first think of it? I think I've always known that I really wanted kids, but I also always felt like I'm absolutely not going to do it until I'm ready emotionally and financially. Then I think I found out that in my mum's side of the family, lots of women went through menopause very early.
Oh, okay.
So I was like, oh God, I don't know if I want to have like 3 kids in the next, before I'm like 45, like that to me, I know like my mom's generation of people would be like, that's very late. But I was like, I've got stuff to do before I start having kids. And I want to put all the things in place before I have kids, so that I can continue to like have an income, but also provide for my kids emotionally as well. And I don't want to just rush into having kids because everyone's like, you need to do it now. You need to do it now, because my kids are the ones that suffer as a result of that,
Which, what do you think helped you be so thoughtful and intentional about that? Because I think what can happen is that we feel that pressure of, we're supposed to do these things at certain times, and if we don't do them by that time, then either we miss the boat or something is wrong with us. Like, what informed, you being so thoughtful about your own timeline for children and where you wanted to be emotionally, financially before doing that? I think so I've had, my family are, I have like quite a difficult relationship with my family. And I realized quite young, like, oh, this maybe is what happens when people are pressured by society to have kids, but they weren't ready, like emotionally, or maybe they didn't want kids. And I realized as I grew up how important it is to have parents that show you like unconditional love, and that they can financially support you as well as emotionally, because I grew up privileged. Like, I'm very middle class, but I think people underestimate how important it is to have like emotional support from parents. And so I did really want to make sure that when I did it and when I had kids, I could be the parent that I wish I had. And so I just wanted to make sure that I could provide for my family emotionally. And that meant like having enough years of therapy to understand myself, understand because otherwise you just continue the cycle. That's, yes, having kids might be a temporary thing to make you feel good. Like you feel like you've ticked that box and brilliant. Society is proud of you because you've done your job as a woman. But then you're like, yes, but what about when my kids get to an age when they start asking me about the world and about like how things work and relationships? Like,
if I haven't got experience, how am I going to teach them to be more secure than I was when I was young, So it's just always been so important to me to be able to have kids, but only if I could do it so that I would be able to raise very healthy, happy young people.
I love that. I love the intention and thoughtfulness behind that. And I think egg freezing is a wonderful option to give us the time to do that, because one of the narratives I've, heard a lot as a therapist in my work, or even personally, is this idea of like running out of time or not wasting time. So it might prompt us to speed things up when maybe we aren't really ready or haven't done that like emotional work.
Yeah. And I do wonder, again, this is like kind of conspiracy theory, but I don't think it's that far-fetched. I just feel like the lack of research into women's health in general, like it's quite convenient that the lack of research means that we have no idea really what happens to fertility after 35. So they're just like, we don't really know. You just have them before you're 30. Like, just do it. Like, we don't know.
Yeah.
It falls off a cliff. Literally, they showed me a graph, which was like the most like hilarious graph ever. It got to 35 and it just dropped.
Oh, I saw that graph at 37, and the panic in my
I was like, but and then you look up research. It's very hard to find like good research on how to improve your fertility after 30. And I was just like, this all just connects too well with society's desperate need for women to be like in the house, looking after the kids, taking care of everything so the men can go and succeed. And I mean, we know that the medical industry doesn't care anywhere near as much about women's health as it should, but this was just another example to me.
Yeah. And I know, from what you shared on stories, and I want to talk more about your egg freezing experience and what it was like to share, because I think we need more people doing that. There's just so much I didn't know, that is the narrative across the board. Like, why didn't we know any of this? There's so much we didn't know. I'm still learning more as I'm trying to have my second. And it's really frustrating. And I know you shared that on your social media, the frustration with that gap of knowledge.
Yeah, it is so frustrating. I think because it's your own body. And I remember I got put on the pill by my doctor when I was 15 because I had very, very heavy periods, and they're very painful. And it was life-changing. It was the best move at the time. But I wish at some point someone had said, like, think about the repercussions of potentially being on the pill for 15 years.
Yeah.
But it baffles me that I didn't. And then the thing that made me come off the pill was I read this book called Period Power. And I didn't know what luteal phase was, what the different phases was. And I was like, oh my God, wait, what? I can like not hack my body, but I can know my body based on my cycle, but I can't do it if I'm on the pill. And while I think the pill is a good option still for some people, because I know the pain that I was in, and like some people with PCOS, for example, but I just think we should have the knowledge. We should be able to make the choice. 100%. And if we don't have the knowledge, we can't. And I started learning more. That was in, I think, 2020 when I came off the pill, because I was like, maybe in the next like 5 years, I'll want to have kids. And then, it baffled me how little I knew. How I went to a Catholic school. So, I mean, we got no education on periods, sex, nothing. My parents didn't teach me anything. So really, the only reason I knew about periods was because we had a friend who started her period when she was 10. And so she told us all about it, thank God. But I had no knowledge. No. But even people that went to like schools that did have a sex education department and did teach people about periods, they didn't teach them about the cycles.
No, none of it. We learned none of it either.
It's just crazy to me that women create life and yet we're not even afforded the knowledge of our own bodies.
Yeah. And I think women are not finding out, similarly to you, like, unless you're doing your own research, you read this book on the period book, and then you're figuring things out about your cycle. And same for me, like doing this podcast, but also going through my own fertility journey. Like I saw on your Instagram also, you read the book, It Starts with the Egg. I read that book too. I read that book after having a miscarriage, right? That's a book I should be reading, and I learned so much from that book, but I found that really frustrating too, is the lack of knowledge, but also then the responsibility that falls on us to do all of it by ourselves.
I couldn't believe it. Like I honestly couldn't believe it. And I know that there are like legal rules about what fertility doctors can advise based on research. So I found myself on Reddit, like on fertility Reddit threads, because I was like, there's no other information. I am using myself as a guinea pig. I did 3 rounds of egg freezing. So there's no, like everything you read, they're like, oh, there's not enough evidence to support that, for example, DHEA is positive. But then you read this Reddit thread about a woman who did find very positive results, but it hasn't been done on a large enough scale. And the reason it hasn't been done is because no one puts any money into the research into women's fertility.
Yeah. I think it starts with an egg. I don't know. I've read so many books since my miscarriage, but I think it starts with the egg, talks about the lag between research and implementation of the research, and it's 10 years behind. And while they're finding really great things in the research they're doing, they'll say it's not a large enough scale, or it's not like appropriately set up, study. Yeah. There was one example where I think it was like something with stillbirth, that if they had implemented what they found in the research, it would have been 10 years of like less stillbirth babies, but there's this lag of the science and implementing science.
It's so hard as well. And I think unless you get a doctor who is, and I hope people do, but you don't always get a doctor who's personally very passionate about like reading the most up-to-date like research. And it's the way they interpret the research as well. Because I met with a couple of different fertility places, and the reason I didn't go to one of them is because the doctor said to me, because I used to do bodybuilding, and I said to her, like, could that affect my fertility? And she was like, well, it just depends if you're like, are you eating a lot of protein now? And I was like, she said protein shakes, and I was like, no, I don't have protein shakes anymore, but I make sure I get my protein, like the correct amount. I thought she was saying you need to be eating enough, but actually she was saying, oh, well, there's been some research showing that protein shakes reduce fertility. And I was like, well, what? That's a very broad, vague statement. So she didn't like me, but I was like, so protein shakes, what kind of protein shakes? Is this whey protein? Is this pea protein? Like what kind of protein, first of all? And second of all, like, tell me about the research conditions, because the likelihood is that people that are taking protein shakes are also doing like quite strenuous exercise. So is it the protein shakes or is it the strenuous exercise? Like, you can't just tell me protein causes a reduce. I was just like,
I still think, and I don't know. So you're based in the UK, correct? Just so the audience knows, right? And so I don't know if there's a difference there versus here. I just don't know. One of the things that is a barrier is the time these fertility doctors have. Like, I don't know if they have time to be looking at the research. I also know sometimes they don't have the time to make it such a personalized experience. And so those things are problematic.
Yeah, it's hard because in the UK we have the NHS, which is the National Health Service, which at the moment is crumbling because the government is underfunding them and they're in a very difficult spot. But they are a brilliant thing. If you pay for your medical bills, you know how amazing an NHS service would be, and they are great. But the likelihood of you getting egg freezing treatment on the NHS is, as a single woman, is almost none, unless you are going through chemotherapy or you have something like very big. If you aren't like married to a man, like have a very like traditional setup, you're not getting it on the NHS. So you have to pay for it privately. So it's very expensive. However, I do know it is much less expensive than it is in the US.
Yeah.
So I don't know how they are charging that much in the US. But in the UK, I at least felt like, listen, if I am paying thousands of pounds on this, I am going to find the person that makes me feel like they actually give a damn about me. But I have heard that in America, it is because all healthcare is basically private healthcare, that it's not as you'd think. You're not getting like a 5-star treatment. Like you get much more like individual treatment, I think, in the UK because there is the NHS. So if you go private, it's like people are like, okay, you're paying for this. Like they can afford to pay doctors more, and therefore the doctors aren't so stressed and overworked and whatever. But I do still feel like sometimes it's, unless they've got hours and hours free in the day, how are they going to be up to date on all the latest research? And it's impossible. It's like a really difficult situation. And then I looked into getting my eggs frozen abroad because it was like a third of the price.
Yeah, a lot of women are doing that now.
And so just the place that I spoke to, I don't know if this is because I'm autistic, but I'm like not great with like comms. So you know how much at the beginning of your egg freezing journey, they will ask you like, what are the supplements you take? What's your lifestyle? Your medical history? What's your family medical history? And that's like that's a lot to go through. There's some like medical trauma in my past. So I sent them over a document with all of the information they could possibly need. And each new person I spoke to at this clinic abroad, it was like I was a new patient and they had no idea.
Yeah, no.
I was just like, I would rather pay more money here to get it right than pay some money abroad and like they get it wrong or they don't care about me. And to be that stressed through the process, I was like, that's going to be counterproductive. So I just forget it. I'm just going to do it in London. And then,
I think that's really great advice for everybody listening is to do the due diligence and take your time to find a place where you feel really, really comfortable. You feel really, really heard. And I've shared this here on the podcast. When I was doing my first transfer, I was just in a rush. Like I was so impatient. I was ready for the second baby that I didn't take the time to do that. And that first experience was like really horrible. And then right after, like, transferred my embryos, found a different place. But I think that's really great advice to just take the time, which I know can be hard when we're feeling impatient about things, but take the time to find the places, like you said, that like you feel heard, you feel cared about.
Yeah, because you have to be relaxed and you have to feel like this is the one thing. Well, probably not the one thing, but one of the only things where normally, if you need to get something done, if you just put more things on your to-do list, you can get more achieved. But the egg freezing was the first time in my life that I was like, oh, to achieve more, I have to do less.
Yeah.
I'm such a control freak and a workaholic that I was like, during the first round, I was very much like, right, my diet needs to be like this. I need to go to sleep at this time, wake at this time. I need to do yoga. I need to do that. I need to have acupuncture. And I was doing it so militantly that it wasn't relaxing.
I relate to that so much. Yeah.
You just like, it's like cost benefit. It's like, yes, it would be good to do yoga tonight, but are you stressing about the fact that you haven't done it? Don't stress. It's better to be calm. But it took me
I think you're so right. I'm relating to that so much in this moment, because if you couldn't tell by everything I'm sharing now, like after my miscarriage, I was militant about everything. I was reading everything. I was doing all the supplements. I was doing acupuncture, all the things. And then those things became the stressor. I was like, this is, like you said, counterproductive. It doesn't matter if I've like eaten the right amount of protein and done the yoga. If I'm like stressed out about it, it's like, I might as well eat a donut. Like, yeah.
I had to just tell myself, I had to be like, what would make me happier right now? Because the happiness, I think, and the calmness is the most important. Yeah. And I did keep trying to tell myself, like, look, some people get pregnant when they are actively trying not to get pregnant. Like, so I just think that sometimes not thinking about it as woo-woo as that seems,
I know,
just relaxing can really help, but that's not my natural.
It's hard, mine either. And I think for a lot of women that I've had on here and talked about that, like this need to control everything and do it all right and do it all perfectly is a real thing. So to try to relax into it is definitely helpful, but hard.
Yeah. And especially if, like, again, because of me doing OnlyFans work, I was able to afford 3 rounds. But some people, 1 round is expensive enough. And some people might only be able to afford 1 round. No. And if you also know, this is it, like, this is all I can afford to do. And like that in itself is a stressor. So it's just, it's a minefield.
Yeah, it really, really is. And that's why it's so helpful to just have more women talking about it, because it is a minefield. There's so much that we don't know. There's so many emotions that go into doing this. I'm curious, did you know you would be doing multiple rounds, or kind of walk us through kind of your first appointment consultation and then sort of the next few rounds? Like if you knew there would be multiple, how you felt?
So I got my AMH level tested and my follicles counted. And I did that at one clinic first. And that was the clinic that told me about the protein thing. And I was just a bit like, no. But they did tell me, they were like, your AMH is, I think it was 2.6, which is quite low. But your follicle is like 9 follicles. So it wasn't like terrible, but it wasn't like amazing.
How old were you when you first started looking into egg freezing?
How old am I now? 30.
Okay.
I think 30. I'm just about to turn 33. So it must have been around 30. Okay. So I like came off the pill in 2020. Yeah, came off the pill in 2020, waited for my cycle to get back to normal, and then started looking into like egg freezing clinics. And then the other reason I didn't like that initial clinic was because they gave me this whole like sales pitch. It felt very sales pitchy and like fear mongery, and like, oh, if you don't do it now. And I was like, okay, but
no, I know.
So they did like scare me in the initial meeting. So I was like, oh, Jesus, okay, I've got to like really start taking this seriously. And they told me to start taking the supplements, coenzyme Q10, DHEA, and then get another blood test in like 6 months and see if it's done anything to my AMH. And if the AMH has gone down or stayed the same, I should really consider multiple rounds, because they said that you can get a rough indication of how many eggs you might get from a round of egg freezing by it's like between what your AMH level is and what your follicle count is. So if I'm 2.6 and 9, I might get between like 3 and 8 eggs per cycle. They were like, that's really not an exact science, but like roughly. So it did actually turn out to be quite accurate, that. But yes, and they said you need about 15 to 20 like to be worth freezing, basically. Yeah.
How was it for you to hear that you had to wait those 6 months?
It was hard, but I am very like, once I get my mind set on something, I'm quite like, right, I can do this. Like, and so I went off and I was like, right, I'm going to research. I'm going to take all these things. I'm going to like fix up my exercise and diet routine. I'm going to like do more yoga and less heavy lifting, like blah, 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 blah. So I love a project. And I also needed to like deal with my finances and like make sure
the time was helpful. I love that. That's a really good shift. Like, again, because I'm thinking for myself, like the impatience of it, but thinking about it and how valuable is this 6 months? How does this 6 months actually really help me?
Yeah. And I really was like, let's see. And I'm very, so I had like very uninvolved parents. So I think, when people tell you, oh, like, good job, you've done very well, I'm very like, yes, validation. So I had the idea, like, I wanted to go back and I wanted to have like really good results. And then that's what's helped me like get motivated to do it crazily. But I was like, well, I think because I knew it was going to be so much money, I was like, let me just try all these things to see if they work, because I don't want to spend, this much money on something that I may not need. Mm-hmm. So let's just one last shot at like seeing really how much I'd need, because the clinic I went with eventually, they did like bulk buy packs. So you could get either 2 cycles or 3 cycles for a reduced rate. But you couldn't choose after doing one to have the package.
I know.
So I was like, well, that means spending like 15 grand.
I know. I know. And places are doing that here too. And
it's too much of a big
decision. So much to decide. And there's so much uncertainty, like to throw that decision into the mix is really challenging.
Yeah. So, yes. So I had to figure it out. And it was a bit like, I think as women, you always assume that you will be able to have kids because you're taught from birth, like that's your function. And again, because we're not really taught about fertility or our bodies or our cycles, we don't know that sometimes that isn't in the cards for everybody, or it might be slightly more difficult.
Or how hard it actually is to get pregnant, right? We're told all these messagings like, don't get pregnant, like you could get pregnant so easily. And it's actually not true at all. It takes so much to get pregnant.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. I do think it comes down to controlling women, because if we terrify women that you can get pregnant from sitting on a toilet seat, like they're going to be so terrified into not doing anything and not being able to have the choice into if they want to have sex and when and whatever. Like, I think that another way of controlling women. But we just have a right to know.
I know. We do. We have a right to know. And again, I think it's taking women doing their own research and advocacy to do it.
Yeah.
So what did you end up buying a bulk? Like, what did you end up doing?
I ended up going for the 3-pack.
Okay.
Because they said, yes, between 15 and 20, you need to get total to be worth freezing. And I was like, right, well, if realistically I'm going to get like maybe 5 each cycle, I've got to do at least 3.
So you are mentally prepared, which I think is good, because I think what happens too is there's like mismanaged expectations. I think it's good that you kind of, and some places here don't even do that, is manage that expectation or give you sort of that rough idea of what you might get based on your fertility health. And I think it's helpful to have that expectation. And so you can mentally prepare to go into 3 rounds, mind and body. I think for women, they do 1 and they're surprised or unhappy with what they get. And then they have to kind of gear up and wrap their head around doing another cycle.
Yeah. I think knowing from the beginning, like, right, this is one of multiple. It also helps you not get all your hopes up for each one, which does help you relax. I really couldn't be bothered to do, because it's something you can't rush. Like, you can do them one after another if you want, but I was just like, surely you need to give your body a break. Like, and if I'm going to spend this much money, I should do it in the way that has the best chance of success. So I think between the first and the second round, I had like 1 cycle in between. Second and third, I think I had 2 cycles in between, and then maybe 2 again between the last round. But I did really just want to get it over with, basically, because it takes over your whole life. Like, and you're tired, and like my ADHD went off the roof. Like, just it's a lot, and you're thinking about it all the time. But knowing from the get-go that it was going to be a long process was good at managing my expectations.
Yeah. And I think what you said too, like, it takes over, like, life doesn't stop just because you're freezing your eggs. Like, you still have to, you have to weave it into your life, like the shots and the doctor's appointments and the monitoring, but like, life is still happening. Like, you still have to, attend to your responsibilities and socialize and do all these things. But it is one of these things. And, I think there's a lot of relief once it's done. So it is sort of this, like, can feel like this race to the finish.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I don't know if this had anything to do with it, but the last round I did, I got the most eggs.
I saw that. Oh my gosh. I was watching your whole highlight on that. And I was like so happy when you said what
I was like, how did I get 9? Like, I know that's in the grand scheme of things. For most people, that's not a huge amount. But for me, I was like, that's huge. But I think it might be because I was like, oh, this is the last one. Like,
I was going to ask you, like, was there anything different about that cycle? And also, were any of the protocols changed from the first to the second to the third?
I think so. The first cycle I got 6, then I got 4. And then when I got 4, I was like, oh, come on. Like, please, I'd like to get more than this. But I think the second round, again, it's not the doctor's fault. They do this all day, every day, but you don't want to be condescending to them or kind of infer that they don't know what they're doing. But I do remember in the second round thinking, I'm sure I was injecting for like a few more days last time, but never mind. Maybe she knows they're big enough, like fine. But then I got much less. And then in the final round, the doctor was like, let's try injecting for a few more days because there are some that might develop. And they did. So I was like, I wish she'd like noted it down somewhere that my follicles, even when they're really small, they often have a viable egg in them. So like keep injecting, like I don't know. So yeah.
I think that's hard too, is like the advocacy again, like having our voice in the doctor's office, right? So like, you know, realistically, we know our bodies the best, but I feel like, and I experienced this myself too, like pushing in the doctor's office can be really hard. And I think sometimes we like quiet our voice a little bit and just like, okay, we're trusting that you know best.
Yeah. And I do think the only reason that I was so like, they probably didn't like me at all, but I was like, you know what? I don't care. Like, I don't care.
You can't care.
Like, I am paying so much for this. It is such an important thing for me. If you think maybe I was condescending or like maybe I was implying that then so be it. Like I have to feel comfortable with this. And that means me saying at the beginning, I'm really sorry, but please note on my file that I only really want to speak to women doctors because I have some like trauma with men in the past. And I just know that if I'm having like internal exams by men every 3 days, that is not going to be conducive to a relaxed environment to grow eggs in. And they were actually great about that. But, you know, previously I would have been very like, no, they're going to think that's like really rude and that's sexist. And like, I can't, but I was like, no, like I just have to do this in a way that I'm comfortable with it. And if that means asking for things that are a bit uncomfortable, so be it. Like you do have to advocate for yourself a lot in the egg freezing process.
A lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was it like for you? Two questions. I've lost your questions. What was it like for you emotionally? Because it is a real emotional roller coaster. You did this for many, many months, probably over a year, considering the 6 months, you know, just kind of getting things sorted.
Yeah.
You know, emotionally, how did you manage and cope, and what came up for you?
I think people's reaction to it was very interesting. So, you know, it brought up a lot of like family stuff. Like when I told my dad, for example, he was like, why don't you just have them now? Just have them now. There's never a right time. And I was like, this is indicative of your your stance on having, like, I think you think having kids is less of a big important thing than I do. I'm not going to have them now because now's not the right time, but it is reminding me that you're quite flippant about like the importance of being a parent. So that came up a lot, like family stuff came up a lot. It also made me very sad again that so many of my friends and like these amazing women that I know, like we're all like early 30s now. And I'm just like, so many of these women do want kids, but they also are like, I want to have a life first, or like as well as, but they've always been made to feel like they have to choose between the two because we've been told, well, if you get to 30 and you haven't popped a couple of babies out, like you're not gonna. so I know people who have either sacrificed a life they wanted to in terms of career or like travel, but they did get to have kids, which is also what they wanted, or they've had a great career, but they now feel like they've sacrificed being a parent. And I'm just like, if we were just told in school that, like, by the way, egg freezing is an option, and the earlier you do it, the better, so much of this could be alleviated. And I just don't understand why we don't give people that knowledge. And that is the most upsetting thing that came up, because I was like, people don't care about women. Like, really, they don't, or women's happiness or women's fulfillment. Like,
yeah. And I think like my frustration too was going through my own journey and also hearing so many other women's is that like biology is stuck. Like we can't change that, but it's not aligned with life anymore. Like women are going to college and traveling and pursuing careers, and we should be able to do that without this like ticking clock of our biology. And that's why I think egg freezing is an incredible option that also should be more accessible to all women. We're not quite there yet. But yeah, that was my frustration in my own journey. Like I didn't meet my partner at 34. I froze at 37. I got pregnant naturally at 39. But, you know, in that time period when I was freezing, I was like, my life is not ready for that yet. Yeah. You know, and just being able to have all the options is tremendous privilege.
And like I guess you said, like having, if you do want to have kids with a partner, you don't even know yourself until you're like, oh, I didn't until I was like at least 30. So I think if I married and or have had kids with the guys I was dating in my early 20s, like that would have been a terrible decision. And I wouldn't have been as good a mum as I will be now, because I just didn't have the life experience or the therapy.
Yes.
And I just think choosing a partner to procreate with is like, you are connected to that person forever in some way or another. Like, and you're like, you owe it to your future kids to
choose wisely,
to pick a good partner to raise this child with. And people they've been taught to be so desperate to like, just get the kids made, that you're like, wait, let's think about our situation and who we're making these kids with. Are they going to be good partners and good parents? Because I think we just aren't told to prioritize that as much as we should. And the people I meet who have met their partners in like later on in life almost always have healthier, happier relationships. And often the kids they have that they had later in life are like by and large better adjusted because their parents had more life experience to teach those kids.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I appreciate you saying that, because I feel like that's been my journey. And, you know, while there was so much angst and anxiety and sadness of not having those things yet, like when I had my son at 40, and now it makes all the sense. Like I'm a better mom. I am a way better mom for it. I know more about myself. I don't feel like I miss out on anything, like, because I've done all the things, I've traveled all the places, we're financially in a place to be able to, you know, provide and do the things like soccer. And so, you know, so yeah, I think just thinking about the value again of the time and the value of doing things a little bit later, how much better those experiences could be.
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes me sad, because if we just had that seed planted, like so many of my friends now are looking into it and getting egg freezing done.
I bet.
Because they hadn't, and because I hadn't even it hadn't even come on my radar, because you think, oh no, that's only when people are doing IVF if they're like not in their 30s, like 40s and beyond. But egg freezing, people associate that only with IVF. And I'm like, no. It can be happening decades before, if necessary. But there is this thing in the UK called freeze and share, which, I mean, I think it's not perfect, and it wouldn't have worked for me because I didn't create like a massive amount of eggs. But if like the barrier to getting your eggs frozen is the financial part, freeze and share is this thing that you can freeze your eggs for free if you agree to donate half of them. Mm-hmm. So I was like, if you're someone who will create like 20 plus eggs per cycle, like maybe that's a good option because that's for free, but at least you've then got some option. And, I made sure before I agreed to all of this and signed the consent forms, like if I don't end up needing all of my eggs, can I give them to people? And they were like, yes, you need to like sign other documents. Yes. But I was like, why can't we all know this and all be sharing eggs?
It's the knowledge.
Those of us that don't want kids can donate some eggs. Those of us that do want kids but that can't have them can take some eggs. Like it could be like a really great thing.
Beautiful thing. Yeah. I mean, that's happening a lot here. I've had women on talking about having babies with donor eggs. So I think, again, just knowing what the options are, we have to be having the conversations and getting the knowledge to know what our options are. So then we can make the decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. And our decisions might then be the same, but I still think it's like, but then we can make an informed decision and we won't end up either being in our 40s and really sad that we haven't had a life outside of being a parent, or be in our 40s and be like, oh, I wish I could have kids, but I did have a really interesting, vibrant life, but like I'm missing out on this thing. Like we could have both if we just knew the options.
Yeah, I think we're hopefully moving in that direction where we're more vocal about asking the questions and advocating for that knowledge. But yeah, to be able to at least have the information is huge.
Yeah.
One last thing I wanted to ask you before we wrapped up, because you did share so openly on social media, and was that something you knew you would do going into your cycles, or did you start doing it and were you like, everybody needs to know about this?
I think I recorded a bunch of stuff in the first cycle, but like I was like, let me deal with this in the second cycle. Like I'll start posting it in the second cycle because I just wanted to be like calm for the first cycle. But during my research and like finding out the utter lack of like available resources for women doing it, I was like, I don't know anyone my age, or definitely not younger, that's talking about this, and not on a like publicly accessible platform. And there is such little evidence out there. And even when you get research, it's very clinical. You don't get like a personal take on what it's like. Mm-hmm. I was just like, I talk about everything else. Like, I would love it if people saw this and were like, oh, I've never even thought of that. Like, let me just look into it. Like, I just wanted it to be on people's radars.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought like doing it in a human way that was not clinical and was how I do everything, just like a nicer way for people to like digest the information that can be quite like, it's quite a lot to digest.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it was something I was really passionate about, like being like, this is fine. This is normal. It's not horrific. Like people were, I think there is a little bit of stigma around egg shaming, because a lot of the comments I got, like sometimes from men DMing me, would be like along in the vein of like, oh, this is what happens when you don't prioritize family, and like you're like all old and dried up. And I was like, it's weird that you think because I'm egg freezing and making a choice that will preserve my fertility, that it somehow takes away people's reactions very strange.
Yeah, so, I've heard that a lot from women that share their egg freezing journey online, that the weirdest, I mean, beautiful things too, like women sharing their stories and being so grateful and learning, but also just like strange, like misunderstandings about why women freeze their eggs, or assumptions about why, or just mean things.
Yeah. Or like even, I feel it's so ingrained in us socially that even the lady that did my acupuncture, I love her and I've been going to her for ages, but in the second round, she was like, still no boyfriend then? And I was like, no, wait, I have a partner. And like, I almost certain I will end up having kids with him, but just not this second. But like the assumption is that
it's so interesting. I think it's like, we're still so stuck in these like societal norms or traditional ways. You know, one assumption I get a lot. So I've been with my partner for 9 years. We have an almost 3-year-old together. Everyone always calls him my husband. And I've just gotten so sick of saying we're not married, like, but they just assume we're married, but we're not married.
It's so weird, isn't it? Because we do think we've come so far, but when you just see what people's go-to responses, you're like, no, we haven't really, have we?
Yeah, it's like it's a rewiring that needs to continue to happen. Like we have to like dismantle the old ways and rewire with new ways where things look very different, and that is totally okay and fine.
Yeah, and the kids are going to be happier. I really do think that the kids.
I think my kid's very happy. So yeah, but it's just I relate to that. Just these assumptions that people make based on like just a surface level view of it.
Yeah. Also highlights how little a lot of people know about human reproduction, not just women. I'm just like, oh, no, that's very incorrect. Like, why do you think that? Like, it's just, people's responses has been the most interesting thing about the whole process.
So you've done 3 rounds. You're done at 3 rounds?
Yeah. So I have 19 now. And I was like, you know what? If in a year I feel like doing one more for safety, I might. But, my twin sister is also doing it at the moment. Her doctor was telling her, like, it's actually not always.
So you're a twin also?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Did you know that? Yeah. Yeah, I'm a twin.
Put that in there. I was like, wait a second.
I'm a twin, and she lives in New York.
No way.
Yeah. So she had like quite a big road accident a couple of years ago. So because of that, she now has to get egg freezing because there was like a lot of like pelvic trauma. But it's just really interesting because now I can see like how it is in New York, like how they treat her versus how they treated me, and it's just. It's very interesting to see the different ways people react to it.
Yeah.
Just really,
oh, well, she has experience.
Sorry, I forgot the reason I was mentioning my sister was because her doctor told her that don't panic so much about the amount of eggs because it's quality over quantity. So you might have 50 eggs, but if all of them are poor quality, then there's no point having 50 eggs. You might have 3, but all of them are very good quality. So when I found that out, I was like, oh, please God, I think 19's enough. Like I'm doing this Edinburgh show now, and that's gonna be this year taken up. So I'm just like, no more. I moved house as well in this year. And
I know when you and I were going back and forth. There's a lot. Yeah.
Like, this room is still not unpacked. Like, yes. So for now, I think I'm happy with 19, and then we'll see in the next couple of years what I think. But I would ideally like to actually have kids in the next like 2-3 years. So we'll see what happens then.
Yeah, you may not even need the eggs.
That's the hope. I'm like, oh, what if, because I have them like on ice, my brain is probably like, okay, it's fine. You're relaxed. So what if I end up getting pregnant naturally? That would be the best case scenario. Like,
that was mine. I froze at 37. I got pregnant.
Oh yeah.
At 39. So yeah, either way, like you made an amazing decision for yourself. I think it was so amazing that you shared it. It's the reason that I found you and asked you to be here to share your story. So I appreciate it so much. Any last words of advice or anything you want to share before we wrap up with the women listening?
I think it is just do what works for you, because panicking and being uncomfortable and whatever, you always have to do a cost benefit analysis of all the things that you're told you should be doing or you shouldn't be doing. Listen to them, digest it, and see what would work best for you. Because again, because there is so little research, the only real thing you can go by is how you feel and how you know yourself. So try to take everything with a little grain of salt and not to stress and be like over panicking, because that in itself is not going to be conducive to like many eggs. And I think what we said about like advocating for yourself, like don't be afraid to be a pain in the ass. Like, this is like the potential of having children in the future. And I'm assuming if you're getting your eggs frozen, that's important to you. So if you ever feel like people are like, oh, she's so annoying, she's all these questions, just remember, like, this is not for them. This is for you. You're paying a lot of money. This is your future. it's okay. It doesn't really matter what people think of you, like advocate for yourself.
Yeah. And I think that's so important. Like what you said, stay attached to the why, right? So if you're like, this is my life, this is something I want, it probably can help you have that stronger voice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Megan, thank you so much for being here. Best of luck with your show. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share.
No, thank you. I'm so glad that a podcast like this exists, and I'm really happy to have been invited on.
Thank you so much. Well, it was an amazing conversation and I appreciate it.
Thank you.